There's still more than 150 people unaccounted for, including 4 Canadians, following that devastating condo building collapse in Miami-Dade County. To discuss this in more detail is U.S. political reporter Lisa Daftari. Lisa, the death toll keeps climbing. Do we know for certain what caused the Surfside building to collapse?
It seems like there was a problem with the foundation. Some reports indicate that the building had some faulty foundation problems for over a decade that weren't properly addressed. This sounds crazy at this time in, when there's so many inspections and there's so many codes and people really keeping up with it. This was a condo building, so obviously having a management board and such, but doesn't take away from the very, very sad reality. This happened at 1 in the morning. Obviously, a lot of people home, sleeping, and therefore that's so many people are unaccounted for till this moment. So we're hoping for the best. Really, prayers are all around for the families of those who have people missing.
Absolutely. Now, search and rescue teams from Israel and Mexico have joined local experts combing through the rubble looking for survivors. Why was the extra help brought in?
Yeah, this is interesting. I think the rate at which they were trying to get through the rubble, if you've seen the footage, Hal, it's tremendous. It's just piled up. And with such a high number of people missing, they're thinking if they expedite, perhaps by miracle of God, they can find some people who may still be alive under this mess. Both Israel and Mexico having experience with this. Israel, obviously, this is a Jewish community, and they feel ties to this community, but Israel's always sending help around the world, regardless of whether it is a Jewish community or not. They have a ton of experience with this type of work. And Mexico, in particular, recently had an earthquake, recently had to dig up a lot of rubble and to get survivors out. So we're very grateful for the additional help and hope that these multiple rescue crews can pull out some of the hopefully survivors.
Now, speaking of Israel, their new government has voiced strong opposition to the United States potentially rejoining the Iran nuclear talks. Israel's foreign minister and the U.S. Secretary of State recently met in Rome to discuss.
Yeah, you'd think this would be a no-brainer, something that doesn't need to be said with Israel, reminding the heads of state here in the United States that they're against an Iran nuclear deal, against normalizing ties with a terrorist regime that pours money into more terrorism in the region, and Israel being a short distance away from the Iranian regime's reach. Again, reminder that the Iranian regime calls Israel the little Satan and the United States the big Satan. So all guns are pointed towards Jerusalem and Tel Aviv and everywhere else. We just had a recent conflict between Hamas and Israel. And who funds Hamas? Of course, the Iranian regime. So, that, Israel is not too keen on the U.S. normalizing ties with the Iranian regime, pouring more money into the system, allowing them to get off the hook, allowing the sanctions to be removed from intricate and very focused and targeted sectors like weapons, like cyber, like all the other um, arenas which allow them to grow and prosper their terrorist machine. I mean, obviously, Israel has voiced concern before, but now that we're down to the wire, Israel feels like they have to give the U.S. another reminder.
Iran says it will not extend the agreement it signed with the International Atomic Energy Agency in February to monitor its nuclear program. There's a big surprise. Now, it was set to expire on May 24th, Lisa, then extended until June 24th, which has also passed. The agreement enabled the agency to collect data on Iran's nuclear activities.
Yeah, well, as you said, no surprise, Hal. But the Iranian regime wasn't being transparent anyway. They weren't allowing these inspectors into the more sensitive places that would indicate that they are in fact continuing with their nuclear program, that they are in fact continuing with enrichment of uranium, and it would be problematic, obviously, to the international community, to the UN's IAEA, and of course to the nuclear deal. But now Iran feels that they have the upper hand. Look, when they have the international community spearheaded by a new administration in Washington D.C. telling them that they want to sit down and sign another nuclear deal similar to the one that we had in 2015, well, they feel that they're in a position of power. They feel like they're in the position of having the leverage here. And I'll remind you, Iran has a new president now, President Raisi, who is a self-proclaimed hardliner. He is a butcher by all means, has a ton of experience in the regime and a ton of blood on his hands. So he's going to have a different approach, and he's going to have a more hardlined approach, and he's going to flex muscles. That's exactly what they're doing. They're saying, we're not going to comply. Not only are we breaching what we agreed to in the 2015 agreement, but we are going to do more, not allow you to get in for inspections, and we're going to demand that all sanctions be removed before we even sit down to the table again. They also refuse to meet with President Biden in advance of signing a deal. So they feel like they definitely have the upper hand here. We'll see what it's going to take to get a nuclear deal. And again, many people here in the United States are warning against an Iran nuclear deal. And of course, Israel has its reservations as well.
Labor strikes over economic demands hit Iran's vital petrochemical and oil industries recently, Lisa. Now, that prompted some experts to say that the demise of the regime could start with some of this labor unrest.
Yeah, well, there's been labor unrest before. I'll remind you that there have been so many protests in recent years, always starting with some sort of industry, some sort of impetus, and that catalyst usually is some sort of economic grievances, some sort of restrictions, some sort of tariff, and that becomes an excuse to start protests that are not only in demand of those restrictions being removed, but really removing the entire regime as a whole. That's what we're seeing in Iran these days. We just had an election where 60 to 70% of eligible voters boycotted the election. They abstained from voting. They said, we don't believe in this system. We don't believe in this government. It was a selection and not an election, meaning all the candidates were of the same fabric and others were not allowed to run as candidates. So therefore, we will not partake. And now these protests are sending another signal to the government in Iran saying, look, we are fed up. We are disenchanted with our government as a whole, and we want to tell the world about our disenchantment. The only problem with this, Hal, is we've seen it in previous years. We saw it in 2009 with the Green Revolution, and we've seen smaller episodes since, including in 2019, where there were over 1,500 protesters killed. It
Wow.
will get bloody and ugly before it's over, but the government will make sure that it's over before we see any kind of significant change.
Lisa, Israel's ambassador to the United States resigned last weekend, hours after welcoming Israeli President Rivlin to D.C. Explain why Gilad Erdan stepping aside is such a big deal.
It's a big deal. It really disrupts the wonderful relationship between Israel and the United States. It also signals, a lot of disenchantment of Israel against the United States and their relationship that has been put on the back burner, in preference to their relationship with the Iranian regime. Look, Israel again has voiced its concern about, cozying up to the Iranian regime, and yet we're seeing from the administration, no adherence to Israel's, claim to the Golan Heights. We just saw that last week. We don't even see them mentioning the term Abraham Accords. They just dismiss it as some sort of, accord that was signed under the Trump administration. And whether it's for making an about face or 180 on the Trump era and his close relationship with Bibi Netanyahu and Israel, or whether it's in ideology and really turning on Israel for in exchange for cozying up further to the Iranian regime, making a deal, really siding with Israel's enemies instead of with Israel. It's a mistake. We look back to a time where support for Israel was bipartisan. It wasn't a left or right issue. It wasn't a liberal or conservative issue. It was the right position to take for the United States as the only democratic state in the region and our major ally. We rely on them just like they rely on us here in the United States. So it's a mistake, and a lot of people are warning against it. And this resignation is yet another indication of a splintering relationship between Jerusalem and Washington.
Okay, Lisa, let's talk about the major rioting which is taking place in Lebanon. Lebanese troops deployed to the northern city of Tripoli recently, taking positions around major state institutions following protests and riots against worsening living conditions. Many protesters and at least 10 police officers were injured. In fact, the World Bank is describing the crisis as one of the worst the world has witnessed in 150 years.
Yeah, Hal, this is a story that not many people are paying attention to, and yet, Lebanon has been in a downward spiral for quite some time now. Since last August, they have not had a stable government. Their economy has been tanking. They are in a horrible, horrible inflation period with basic goods being unavailable to them. And on the cherry on top being Hezbollah, the terror organization funded by the Iranian regime, taking over so many parts of that country with people on the streets saying, look, we've had enough. We've reached rock bottom. And it's always the economic factor that pushes people out onto the streets, regardless of how much instability there can be with regards to politics and terrorism and other things. It'll always be getting bread on the table that will push people out onto the streets. And that's exactly what we're seeing in Lebanon, a place worth really focusing on and trying to create stability there. They're one of the states that have the potential to join the modern states in the Arab world in coming closer to the United States, coming closer to Israel, like the states that signed on to the Abraham Accords, for example. Lebanon definitely has that potential, and the people on the streets are saying that we want a better future of prosperity, and we're tired of the status quo.
Lisa, with China emerging as a major threat to many other countries around the world, India is looking to expand its military capabilities in space. The director of the Center for Security, Strategy and Technology says geopolitics is the primary driver for India to focus on the military aspects of its space program.
Finally, some good news out of India, right, Hal? We've been waiting for this for a while now with all that bad news and all those bad numbers, COVID numbers rising steadily over there. Finally, we see India coming out on top, being competitive with its neighbor China, looking over to China and seeing how they are growing all their capabilities, whether it be militarily, in space, cyber capabilities, and they're saying we want to compete as well. So some good news out of India, some good competition, but I think the rest of the world needs to look at the reality too. China's growing and they're growing steadily, and the Western world needs to take a look at that and really reevaluate the threat that China is.
There was some major outrage in Pakistan recently when the country's Prime Minister Imran Khan blamed the rape crisis on women. In fact, he told a reporter who said there was a rape epidemic in Pakistan that, quote, if a woman is wearing few clothes, it will have an impact on the man unless they're a robot. It's common sense. Last time I checked, that is not common sense.
No, I mean, it's awful. What he said is just horrific. Even alluding to that is just horrific. And for a person in a position of prime minister to say that and to really dismiss the threat of rape, the threat of or taking away the responsibility of men in that equation is just horrific. I was about to post that as before we came on live, and I just wanted to make a mention that this is the world that we live in. So you have people all over the world criticizing countries like Canada, like the United States. In fact, there's an Olympic athlete who wants to go to the Olympics and win so that she can burn a U.S. flag on stage. And then you juxtapose that with episodes like this, where women aren't even acknowledged when they're being raped. They're actually blamed for the clothing that they're wearing. It makes us grateful for where we live, and be realistic about the rest of the world and what the realities there are for women. Lack of opportunity and really lack of justice in this case. So just shaking my head at this one.
Yeah, no kidding. Thank God we've come a long way as a society here in North America. Our foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari, joining me once again from Los Angeles. Thanks so much, Lisa.
My pleasure.